Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you. And I am very pleased to be here today to talk about one of my very favorite topics, which is conflict management strategies for leaders. It's much more exciting than the title sounds. Quick shout out and thanks to Holly and Brenda and Kay and Angela for getting me here and being part of this. So thank you very much for that. So my name is Cherolyn Knapp. Cherolyn rhymes with Marilyn. I use pronouns she and her. I am I want to begin by respectfully acknowledging that I am speaking to you from the unceded and traditional territories of the Lekwungen speaking people, also known as the Kosapsum and Songhees nations, and otherwise known as Victoria, British Columbia. I grew up in Owen Sound, Ontario, which is a fairly small town, and have also lived in Toronto, Guelph, and Ottawa before finding my way to the best coast. West Coast is the best coast 6 or 7 years ago. Over the years, I had many different jobs, which I like to think led me to the path that I am on now. I've been a day camp counselor, a cook, an ice cream scooper, a nonprofit director, a business manager, and then eventually I became a lawyer. I spent before coming to Vancouver Island and working in the realm of conflict resolution. I spent 15 years practicing workplace and civil litigation, and I was also the co-managing partner of a small law firm in Ontario. And I want to say that although um, more than 50% of graduates of law schools now are women, in fact, the numbers at senior levels of private practice law firms and other the stats in terms of who stays in the private practice of law indicate that it is still in many ways a male dominated industry. So I feel like I'm at home here and having these discussions. In all of those roles, conflict came up and sort of helped me form the path to where I am now. Where I am now is I am a sole practitioner. I I have my own shingle and I work in the spaces of workplace investigations into allegations of misconduct. I do conflict resolution in the sense of one-to-one mediations in workplaces between litigants, among professionals, and I also work with larger groups who need to build capacity around conflict resolution and collaboration. It is my passion to talk with people about conflict resolution and collaboration in a way that they can make life more, I don't know, enjoyable and work together to do great things. To get started, I want to share a couple of stories with you. A few years ago, I was engaged as a workplace investigator in a rather complex situation. And as with most complex situations, it had been brewing for a while. Through the process, I learned that the complainant had brought forward concerns earlier on in an attempt to raise these concerns of discrimination with the manager. And the manager, being well intentioned, but maybe a little misguided, some stuff. The first step was to just send out a mass email. Here, everybody, remember we have a respectful workplace policy. And the impact of that kind of thing, well, sure, I'll have more to say about that. But for me, the impact of that kind of email is very little. People who receive that kind of email often don't know it's really who it's directed to. The second thing was that when the complainant was not satisfied with that as the way to deal with some pretty serious concerns, the manager thought that she was could pull people into a facilitation and pull the two people off the floor one day without any preparation and put them in a room together to have a talk. And well, if you can only imagine, the issues were extremely sensitive and without any preparation or any skills or even knowing what was about to happen, it backfired very, very badly. Despite the well-intended attempt at conflict resolution. And and then after all of that, when everything backfired, the manager did something else, which was to tell the complainant, well, without any hard evidence of what you're alleging, there's actually no. And that was quite an incorrect thing to say. Anyway, as you can imagine, it made the whole situation worse. And later, much later, then there was a workplace investigation, and it was my job to begin unpacking all of that. Let's contrast that with a different time that I was engaged by a group of people, different type of scenario. This was a group of professionals who were looking for help for their group. They told me that their meetings had completely devolved into circular conversations, not enough time to dig into the issues. Some people were getting into it with each other and going head to head. There were raised voices. Other people felt like they couldn't even speak up and say their piece during the meeting because they were worried that people would hold it against them afterwards. And so they decided to bring in me to help them get back on track as a group. And they have to say they had really good vision in doing it. I think how it started was, oh my goodness, we need a mediator. I don't think they knew what that would look like. But what we did was I met with each of them individually to hear them and understand where they were coming. And then I made a plan, which I got their buy-in to do before we started doing it. I spent a bit of time educating them on skills for how to engage with each other differently. And then I went to their community. We found a day that we could all get together. And I spent a day practicing those skills with them and moving to a place where they could actually talk in an orderly fashion and come to a way to make decisions together in what was a pretty difficult situation. So I see many kinds of situations where leaders are called upon to handle conflict, whether it's on the teams they supervise or with their peers or in relation to their own superiors. And I think the difference between an emerging, aspiring, or accomplished effective leader and uh, and 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 one who is not those things is whether we've got skills for in a very savvy way to handle the conflict that comes forward. So with that, I would like to to unpack some of what I've just told you about, and then share with you what I've learned through the work that I do as a conflict resolution practitioner. First thing is to say here are a few things. So let's not do certain things. Let's not do things like just do nothing and hope. That's one thing that I think leaders do get wrong is like, oh, I don't even know what to do here. Maybe if I let enough time pass, it'll go away. So let's not do that. On the converse, let's not also wait for a formal complaint. Let's not say, well, unless there's a formal complaint that goes forward, there's nothing I can do. I already told you, let's not send mass emails. Let's not send emails to everybody, sort of like keeping everyone in from recess because one student was misbehaving, and so everybody has to pay. Let's not admonish whole groups that way. Let's not give empty reassurances when someone comes forward with what feels to them very serious. Let's not pat them on the head and say, "Oh, there. I'm sure that's not what the other person said." This is a double negative. Let's not document or follow up. When people come forward to share concerns with any of us, or we have to have important conversations with people. Let's remember to take some notes. And a final thing I notice is that some people are very well meaning but very busy, and also think that when it comes to conflict in the workplace, it's other people's jobs to be adults and figure it out. And I don't know, I guess because of the work that I do, all those years in litigation and all these subsequent years doing conflict resolution, I realized that people actually need help to do that. It's hard for them to do it by themselves. So then, okay, so how to get it right? When conflict presents itself, there are some things that the savvy leader can do to get it. And I'm going to run through and introduce them here, and then we're going to dig into those further as we go along. First thing is to recognize the signs, to notice I think when conflict is happening and things are getting escalated in a workplace, sometimes we can find ourselves in the middle of it. And it helps to step back and ask ourselves some questions to recognize the sign. The next thing to do is to be able to remain in a calm mindset, a calm way of being and feeling so that we can access our very nuanced conflict resolution and communication skills. The next thing to do is to get advice, get input. Don't think that we have to go it alone. I've talked with many leaders who will say things like, "Well, I was waiting to get somebody else involved. I wanted to see if I could solve it." I understand that feeling, but we do need to bring in other people. We do also need to clarify expectations with people and provide support for dealing with difficult situations and work with people to figure out what the options are and then have decisions and take action. So I said we would talk about how do you notice unhealthy conflict? How do you recognize the signs of it? And when I in this work that I do, I have noticed that there are signs that show themselves over and over again. And so here's a little diagram to show what I think happens when a team is going off the rails. And so it starts with just negativity. People complaining generally in how they talk to each other and a level of reactivity to that negativity. People seem to get upset that reactivity and negativity leads people to blame each other and be more focused on what other people are doing wrong than maybe what they are themselves bringing to the situation. And it also leads to a level of defensiveness that causes people to stop talking to each other. So when the people are upset with each other, the team's going off the rails, that leads to feelings of frustration, and then they start talking about each other instead of to. Word gets around that people are talking about each other. So then there is mistrust. And I think also the human brain, when it starts to see others in a negative light, things there's some confirmation bias that creeps in there. And we start to see things through a negative lens. People start maybe thinking more about formal complaints about each other. Certainly there are lots of informal complaints that leads to division in the sense of us and them. In a team, camps can form. I only trust the people I like and the people who agree with me, and then there's the them who are not to be trusted. Camps can form within a team or between the team and management, or between certain teams within the organization, and then people start to give up. And once they give up, um, they're looking for other jobs, and you may well have been in this situation yourself. So people are looking for other jobs, and then that leaves other people uh, there to mind the store alone or with a reduced team. And so then people start feeling burnt out and tired, and then lo and behold, you've got more reactive negativity, and the cycle continues. So you've probably been a part of a work team or witnessed it happening on a different team and know that this is not the place anyone wants to be. But what to do? What to do when you have the ability to have influence, and either as a leader or as the contributor that you are to make a change? The first step is to create the to really be mindful about the mindset that we're going to have about conflict. When we notice the signs before we take action, we really need to think about, okay, how am I going into this? Am I going into this with an adversarial mindset, which is one that is a little heightened and also comes to us naturally because um, what we tend to want to look at, okay, who's at fault for this, or But the result is that we get into this adversarial mindset, which is really headbutting. So that's where people will look at the other person as the problem instead of thinking about, well, what is our problem? So it's a personalization of the problem, which leads to people becoming more escalated and trying to persuade each other. But persuasion doesn't work. People just dig in their heels. And so instead, could we have a problem solving mindset? That's different. That's where we say the problem is separate from ourselves. The problem isn't you. Let's articulate what the problem is, give it a shape, give it a size and a texture, and see if we can't then bring all of the ways in which we are different to bear on solving that. So that's a really key foundational point about thinking about, are we going to do conflict in an adversarial way, which really only results in a win-lose? Or could we still disagree, even sometimes quite heavily, but bring those different ways of seeing things to bear on the problem and come up with solutions? So the next question will be how, and I will introduce the framework for how in a little bit. Once we've thought about, oh, I need to be in a problem solving mindset here if I'm going to get through this situation and provide good leadership to it, the next part is to say, so I need to be in a calm state to be able to do that. The, the calm state is what allows us access to our prefrontal cortex and other funky parts of our brains that do sophisticated things. I'm sure you may have been in a situation, in an interaction with somebody, or maybe you get that email and it burns in the pit of your stomach. And because you've been told don't respond right away. But how do you get there? How do you prevent that voice in your head that's going, you have to stand up for yourself. Don't put up with this from people. So calm self means use some strategies to slow down. That includes being mindful of our breath and stopping and taking, 3 deep breaths or maybe 10. And another strategy is to say nice things to ourselves. We've got that. I don't know about the voice in your head, but the voice in my head can be pretty and it's looking out for us. The job of that voice is to say, look out, you're not safe. You need to be careful right now. Other people are out to get you. Like it's got a purpose, but it often leads us astray. So instead, we can say nice things to ourselves. Hey, you've got this. You're accomplished. You know things. A really important thing to do when conflict is happening is to figure out ways to take a break. You don't have to commit to things right away. You can take a break and and just use that to get back to being in a calm place. Use that as a time to think about things. And taking a break can look like saying to somebody, "Hey, you know what? You've given me a lot to think about. I'm going to give that careful consideration and get back to you." Another way we can help ourselves get centered or focused is carry a fidget object or engage our five senses. Like these are really mindfulness exercises that help us get back into our bodies so that we can do the hard work of handling conflict. And the final strategy is to think of something awesome in the sense that it helps us reorient ourselves that it's not the most important thing in the world. Yes, it's important, but it allows us to feel just a little bit, readjust our perspective on things. So, from our calm state, the next thing I'd like to turn and talk about then is some key communication skills that have to be used in order to engage in effective collaborative problem solving or conflict resolution conversation. And so I think of these as building blocks, and then we're going to plug the building blocks into a frame. I'm going to start actually with listening. There is a paradox when it comes to trying to really understand people or solve a problem, which is that if we want to be, if we want the other people to hear us, we really have to listen to them. And it's not enough to listen. We have to be seen. Many of us, I think most of us, when someone is talking to us, we are listening to respond, not listening to understand. And so that the the strategy of active listening means that the other person can really truly get that we are listening to what they have to say. So there are some ways that we show active listening. The first one is to use encouragers, like just say, uh-huh, and that kind of thing, so that the person knows you're really listening to what they have to say, even if you don't agree, but that you're being quite attentive and listening to them. The next strategy is to say back to the person what you heard them say. And so if someone comes, like I'm thinking about the example that I told, where the group of professionals, their meetings were devolving and people were really unhappy and not able to talk to each other. This was a key skill that I taught them. Like, you need to work on active listening with each other. And I taught them to, instead of just talking over each other, each person would take their turn speaking about an issue, and then somebody had to give them active listening and to say, so what I hear you saying is, and the way this dynamic switch was amazing. They went from feeling unheard and frustrated to feeling heard, and it set them up to be able to solve problems. Sometimes, though, you don't really want to repeat back to people what they're saying because what they're saying is highly negative. And so, another strategy is to reframe what they said. So, as an example, if someone says, things are really terrible around here, nobody pays attention to us, they don't value our contributions, the company sucks. You're not going to repeat that back to people and say, oh, so what I hear you saying is, because that's a lot of negativity. A reframe is where instead of repeating that back, you flip the coin, basically, and feed it back to them like, oh, so what's important to you is, it's important to you to feel valued. It's important to have your contributions recognized. It's important to you that, the company makes some big picture decisions in a certain direction. The final active listening strategy I want to highlight is reflecting feelings back to people. So we've talked about reflecting their content back to them, but to also say something about, oh, it sounds like this is really intense for you. I can see that this is really. So those are some ways to demonstrate active listening. And I've talked about, you might be thinking to yourselves, like, is this just a communication webinar or where's the part about conflict resolution? But I'm telling you, for my money, the amount of time I spend employing these strategies in my work, it's basically all the time. And it's what helps me unlock the key from people who've been wound up in conflict and frustrated to be able to begin moving forward to what's next. Together with doing those active listening moves, I am also asking questions. And we have to ask questions to dig deeper, not questions to interrogate, to get to the bottom of all of that, but open-ended questions that are designed to show interest and let the person know you're very interested and get them talking more about where they're coming from. It's how we move from adversarial positions to the interests that are underlying those positions. And so we want to highlight the skill of asking open ended questions. We're just simply, could you tell me more about that? Or I heard you say this. Can you say more about what that means for you? What do you hope for this? Something that happens when I teach people about asking questions is their primary question is, how would you like to fix that? Or do you want to hear my advice about how to fix that? And so I want to encourage all of us to resist the urge to fix. When people are coming forward with concerns that they want assistance with, they actually don't want to be fixed. Oftentimes they want someone who's going to listen and work it through with them. But that's not the same as running around waving your little fix it wand on everybody else and imposing your solutions on other people. So we want to ask them open ended questions and get them to say more. We might ask some informational questions to find out a little bit more about what they're talking about. We can check in and clarify with them. Like, here's what I think you're saying, but I'm not really sure. Is that what you meant? And the ultimate goal is to dig deeper to find out what's really important and, what's important to you about this. What's your goal here? So these are not fix it solution questions. Those come later. These are get the person talking more about where they're coming from and why it's important to them. As I mentioned, from where I sit for the work that I do, when I can get people using those two skills combined with a key skill around how they then state their own needs, this gets us working together differently. And so this skill is around how do you then share your own. It's important in collaboration and in conflict resolution for people to be able to say, here's what I need. Because otherwise, we're just sitting around agreeing to what other people need all the time. And that's not the point. The point is to be able to assertively say, when this kind of thing happens, here's what I need. So let me point out a difference between how we talk about what we need. Oftentimes, when we are feeling upset, when people are feeling upset, they will communicate in you state. You should have done this, you should have done that. And they come across as blaming and accusing. By contrast, when we communicate with I statements, it comes from a place of problem solving. So if you are saying like, you never empty the dishwasher, you don't respect my time, you think that I'm just here to do all the housework, that is not going to be, it might be true even, but it might not be, but it might be true and it's not going to lead to a productive discussion. A different way to say those, and those things come up in the workplace too, right? Where we're saying things like, you should have done this, or you didn't do that, or it's clear you think this. And the brain doesn't listen to somebody else using the word you. It will, however, listen to the word I. So I can say, when I come home and the dishwasher is still full, I feel like unappreciated because I work so hard. And what I really need is for us to take turns emptying the dishwasher. As an example, obviously, workplace conflict is more complicated than that. Although I have done workplace mediations about that included parts about people feeling really resentful that they were the ones that had to clean the kitchen. So those three communication skills are active listening, asking questions out of curiosity to dig deeper and find out more, and then the ability to share a perspective to say, from where I sit, from my perspective, what I experience, what I see. We take those three building blocks and we put them together into a collaborative problem solving frame. So this framework is one that if you take a negotiation course, conflict resolution course, a mediation course, this framework, I didn't make this framework up. This is the framework that gets taught. It includes 6 stages, which you can see are preparation, introduction, issues, interests, solutions, and agreement. And they can move around. Like, it's not a linear model. It's a circular model because you can go from back and forth between the stages, or you can find yourself back around starting in preparation on a new issue, for example. So now I will spend a little bit more time talking about each of these stages in the model and explain a little more what I'm talking about. So let's imagine that concern comes forward in the workplace and someone says, I need help solving this problem. maybe it's because they are feeling disrespected by another team or by somebody on the team, and you're thinking about, okay, how are we gonna handle this? The first step is to prepare, and you'll have learned this if you learned anything about negotiation. We have to prepare first, and to do that, it's getting into that problem solving mindset that we talked about. There might be information that we need to acquire before we jump in. Um, Unlike the example of the manager that threw two people in a room together without notice, there might be information. There might be time is needed, a time whether that's needed to prepare mentally for the people who are involved, or it might be about setting a time to have a conversation in advance, finding a time that's going to work for other people, and figuring out where you're going to have the conversation. Is it going to be is someone going to call somebody? Are we going to have a meeting together? So there are a number of things to do ahead of time to get ready. And if the idea is that you're going to attempt to help some people uh, solve solve a problem through conflict resolution, or that you yourself need to have a conflict resolution conversation with somebody, the next step then is to introduce the conversation and set the tone. And so, what we're going to start with is inviting somebody into a problem solving discussion. And so you can say, hey, can we chat about this? Could we set aside some time to have a conversation about that thing that happened yesterday? I've noticed something in the workflow that isn't working? I'd love to talk about that. At that point, the only thing we really need to get into detail about is when and where and how and who. We don't need to have the conversation. In fact, it's probably best not to. But just invite someone into the conversation, and this is the introduction phase because we are setting the tone for what kind of conversation are we going to. The third step is to figure out what are we there to discuss. So this is the stage. This is the well. I think things fall apart at many of these stages. But taking time to figure out what are we actually here to discuss. And so the word that gets used is issues, but another way to think about that is topics. It's a what are we here to talk about? What are we here to solve together? And so, whether it's setting up a team meeting or even creating a mini agenda for a conversation with some, could we talk about effective teamwork? Could we talk about effective use of our communication tools so that we're not all overwhelmed with lengthy emails or voluminous emails all the time? Is setting up a topic or an issue to decide. We want to use neutral wording. We don't want to say, we're here to talk about your terrible emails. We want to say, let's have a conversation about effective use of email communication. We want to avoid position statements when we're setting out an issue. We're not going to say the problem is you're a terrible email writer. We're going to say we need to talk about effective use of our, of emails and our Teams channel. We also want to avoid either or. We want to avoid framing the issue as something that's either or. We want to, if you're saying, well, we need to talk about whether or not these people can work together. Now you're setting people up for adversarialism and position. What we want to do is leave it as a descriptor that we all understand so we can talk about it without setting out the position or getting people into an either or situation too early. Finally, after we have ascertained what the issues are that we're talking about, and it might be two or three, or it might be more than that, then we get to explore the interests. And so, exploring interests, you'll notice we're finally talking about it. We've had three stages of getting ready and framing the structure of the conversation, which tends to improve the quality of problem solving and collaborative conversations greatly. So we're going to explore the interests by using those I statements we talked about, asking questions, and demonstrating active listening. The point here is to allow for multiple perspectives to exist at the same time. So, like that group of professionals where I taught them how to go around the table and each person could say what they thought, we were getting away from adversarial debate. The point was that all the perspectives could exist and we didn't have to shoot them down. We didn't have to disagree with that. We could allow them to exist and resist debating them at that point in time. Stage 4 is about getting the perspectives on the table, asking questions to understand why they're important to people, what's going on there for you, dig deeper so that now we've got a full array of information. And only after you've got people's perspectives on the table, now we can start fixing. And so the stage 5, now we can start saying, here's what I think we should do. And this stage is not about getting back into debating who's right and who's wrong and who has the right idea about what to do. This stage is about a brainstorm, brainstorming ideas, um, getting a list on the page. The idea being that we're going to put ideas on the page that um, relate to those interests that we already talked about, right? It isn't to just go back to the beginning and start putting the thing you always wanted to have happen there, but to say, could we generate ideas together that address the different perspectives that we brought forward? Another way to think about this is to exchange proposals because saying, here's what I think we need to do comes across like a demand. And you have that same problem where the other brain's not listening. Saying, here's my idea, here's my suggestion, here's what I propose. It's interesting. It opens up the other person's brain to hear it and build on it, or hear it and be more flexible and say, well, yeah, I could do that. Or I can't do the whole thing, but I can do part of it. And then what if we also did this? So now you're in something that is flexible as opposed to rigid and prone to debate. I suggest getting, 3 to 5 options on the table for potential solutions. You might know some of the options aren't workable. That's fine. But if you're talking with someone and you've gone through the stages that we've talked about, that I think it's got to be fair game if someone says something that's extreme. It still goes on the list because it's technically an option. But you don't stop there. You don't shoot them down. You just say, okay, technically it's an option. What else? What else? What other options? And get more options on the table. Once you've got several options on the table, now we can think about, okay, let's go back and assess them. Let's do some pros and cons for these options. What are some potential obstacles? Could we get around the obstacles? Do we have access to resources to get around those obstacles? What generates some more options to get around the obstacles? Ideally, what you've then got is an understanding of some options and a sense of who's willing to do what going forward. And so at the end, the final stage is to then confirm your agreement. So probably some revision and prioritization, maybe some ranking and refining of what those options were and what people can agree to. And then to start posing the question like, okay, where's everybody at on this? And you might need to go around the room again or check in with everybody and say, can you say whether can you live with this? Is this something you can live with? Is it something you're willing to try? It takes a lot of active facilitation to ascertain where you have agreement and it doesn't just land all by itself. It takes checking in with people and really listening carefully to say, well, actually, it sounds like we have agreement on this point and this point. Am I right about that? Did I hear that properly? Did we get that agreement? Is it okay with everybody if I write that down as something we've agreed to, and then move on to the next topic and continue to pull together this set of things that have been agreed to. Once you're clear what's been agreed to, so whether we're talking a, a team plan for what to do next, an inter-team plan for teams working together, or a one-on-one conversation around how we're going to navigate our situation together, ideally that gets written down. But that just might be an email. It should be talked about. So it should be talked about with the person to say, okay, so I think we've agreed to this. It's important that we write that down. And how about if I send you an email? Here's what I think we've agreed to. Is it okay if I send you an email and you tell me if I didn't get that? So now you were addressing the, when we don't document things and then wish we did later, that you created some a way to go back and say and check in on what was that we agreed to, and did we do that? Do we need to refine it? So I've taken you through the 6 stages very quickly in this model. The point is to show that the opposite of adversarialism is not just nothingness. It's not just, oh well, we hope for the best. There is a structure to successful collaboration and so successful problem solving. I recently delivered a workshop to a technology company that was looking to really enhance their collaborative problem solving skills for all of their leaders. And after spending quite a lot more time than we have spent here today, by the way, but after spending a few hours with them, teaching these skills, practicing the skills, and then taking them through a model of it where we had some live examples of issues that were live for the company and beginning to talk about those, at the end, someone said that their takeaway was to trust the model because it so that was very made me feel really good. And once again, it's not a model. It's not like I created the model, but understanding that we need structure when we're going to do conflict resolution, whatever it is. Now, I'd like to switch gears as we round out the presentation to say sometimes, you need help, and sometimes conflict resolution actually isn't going to be the right process. I'll declare my bias here. I happen to be a strong believer in conflict resolution processes. I think a lot more can be done. However, sometimes a formal process is needed. So let's pause for a moment that if in your workplace things are happening and it's feeling complicated and stressful, to think about, well, when might I need to go to HR or to my superior and think about, do we need to do a formal investigation? And the purpose of an investigation really is to find facts about what happened in order to then take steps. And so rather than a, a collaborative problem solving approach, which would be about how are we going to talk about where we're different and figure out how to move forward, an investigation is about looking back at what happened and finding. Sometimes it's needed though. One of those times is if there is the conduct is of such a serious nature that it would likely result in serious discipline or even termination of that person's employment. If we're talking about very, very serious misconduct, that needs to be brought forward. You can't go that alone. You need to bring that forward and get support around what is the correct. Another time is maybe it's not that serious, but a progressive discipline record is advisable. And that's probably because there's a history with this person and there may be strategic reasons or organizational reasons where it would be more suitable to be in a position to impose discipline. Now, I am not a believer. I don't actually believe that you can manage behavior and change workplace behavior through trying to discipline people into better behavior. With that said, sometimes that's what's needed. And so, if there's a desire to be in a position to impose progressive discipline, an investigation is likely going to be required. Another time when we're not going to attempt conflict resolution is if there are indications that someone might abuse that process. And so that's why some of that preliminary preparation work is so important before we pull people off the floor and throw them in a room together to get a sense as to whether they're going to be able to engage in that process with an open mind and in a way that's not going to cause more harm. Uh, Another time when it may need a formal process if there's the potential for serious risk to the employer. So that serious risk might be some kind of legal liability, or it might be a risk of reputation of some kind. The other thing I want to tell you about is just to remind you who the other resources are that in many organizations are available to help. Uh, pe- Leaders and employees in organizations don't need to go it alone. So they may have access to a human resources department or a person whose job it is to really be knowledgeable about these things and to help guide in terms of process. Um, in a larger organization, you might be lucky enough to have an organizational development or OD department, and organizational development or learning and development. There may be conflict resolution courses, there may be coaching available to help people through difficult situations. Depending on the situation, if it's quite serious, it might be time to involve employee or labor relations, and their job is to guide um, guide their leaders through the more serious types of formal types of processes. It might be a situation where uh, if someone is inside of a union, then consulting with union reps and getting some help for the situation, or if a person's not in a bargaining unit, thinking about getting legal advice about the situation and what to do. And that might be for person who is an employee, or it might be for leaders to really think about, is this a time for us to get legal advice? We also have access to outside resources. There may be mentors, there may be coaches, there may be conflict resolution practitioners that we can draw in for a short period of time to help the organization. And leaders can bring that forward to say, is this a time we should be bringing someone in for some consulting support for this? As I mentioned, I do talk to a number of human resources professionals and employee and labor relations professionals in my work, and I have to say the amount of time I hear, "Gosh, I really wish that they had brought us in sooner because would have been a lot easier to be helping earlier on in the trajectory of the situation than coming in to do cleanup afterwards after." So, I have a small wrap up exercise to. I realize I have delivered a great deal of information rather quickly. And I'm hopeful, though, that as I was talking, some things might have come to mind about your own situations. And if you would, with me, let's spend some time writing some notes. So you can write some notes to yourself. And the purpose of doing this is because we all go to many different interesting kinds of professional development, and it's easy to get fairly enthused while you're there. And if you haven't had time to make a little bit of a plan for yourself, it's also easy to the very next day forget whatever it was that you wanted to make sure you started doing. Get out a pen, get out or other typing implement. Make a note on your phone if you want to, or type a note on your computer. And so here is what I'm asking. Were there three things you want to remember? Maybe there are things you already knew, but you want to take that away from this moment that we have together. And if there are a couple of questions you want to look into more, maybe I said something that tweaked your mind of, I'd like to find out more about that. So what are you going to go research? What YouTube videos or research could you go and look into, or people to talk to? Stuff to find out more about. And at least one action to take. Is there anything here that you might do differently or take away and start as part of your own action plan. After that. So let's take a couple of minutes. We'll just have it as quiet time. If someone is watching this on demand after not in the live session, but on the recorded video, you might want to press pause right now. And then, but the rest of you don't have to press pause. And so let's just take a couple of moments. And then I am going to ask you to pick something and share it. And I see practice reframing when people are complaining or gossiping. Yes, it's a super great thing to do to say, oh, so I'm hearing what's important to you right now is this. Yeah. I see Holly um, framing things as obstacles and options instead of objections. Certainly, right? Because an obstacle is something you share with the other person, right? It's if it's not going to work because I have an obstacle, then let's work on that obstacle together. Right. I see another one here about staying calm and stating facts and not accusing. We want to, right? We want to stand up for ourselves. We want to stand up for ourselves, and we also want to persuade. We want to attempt to persuade, but it actually doesn't work. People don't like being persuaded. They don't mind coming up with options together. They don't really want to be sold that your way is the right way. I see to research some strategies for articulating issues that are explicit but not petty. Yes, indeed, right? We want to think that's a fair point. Thank you for bringing that up. We want to articulate issues ideally in a way that's about how are we going to deal with this going forward as opposed to what went wrong. The issue isn't like who did what to who. It's more like what do we need next time? I see someone wrote about liking brainstorming ways. Yeah, so that people feel heard and it's not like we're going to shut down all of the options. Hey, more attentive to structure. Thank you. I think when we create a structure for conversation, they're more likely to go well and end up being really circular. Remember not to say the problem is, especially if it's the problem is you. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Remember not to do it alone, stay calm, and do more research on those 6 steps. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you sharing. Makes my heart happy to know that people were listening. So thank you very much. Imagine when conflict arises, you feel confident, calm, knowing you have the skills and frameworks for navigating these situations. Even better, you lead your team and work with colleagues competently through turbulence. Imagine, I believe each one of us can enhance our own skills for managing workplace conflict in a healthy and constructive way. And with that, I want to say it has been a pleasure to share some skills and strategies with you on conflict management strategies for leaders. And please feel free to find me online or contact me by email if you would like to talk about what conflict resolution processes can look like in your organization or your situation. Thank you very much for listening.